You have it all figured out, haven't you? Even though you are the daughter of the worthless quack who couldn't help Lady Arduo. Yes, even so. Blame in medicine could not be dismissed with a helpless shrug. That was something else her father had said. He would have readily accepted abuse like being called quack. You know that quack prevented your mistress from using face powder with white lead in it, and you were too smart to have given the child something so deadly. Maomao opened the small jar in the letter case. Honey glistened inside. Maomao put the red flower from the jar into her mouth. It carried the sweetness of the honey. She plucked off the blossom and played with it in her fingers. There are many varieties of poisonous plants. Wolfsbane and azalea are examples. And the toxins carry over to honey made from them as well. I am aware of that. I should think so. A family of beekeepers could certainly be expected to understand such things, and if a toxin would cause serious poisoning in an adult, think what it would do to a child. But you didn't realize honey could contain poison that only affected children. It wasn't an assumption, it was fact. These toxins were rare, but some existed. They were only poisonous to children who had lower levels of resistance. You tasted the honey and were fine, so you assumed he would be too. But the medicine you gave the boy to help him grow was actually doing the opposite, and you never realized it. Then Arduo's child died. The cause of death was unknown. Liu Hemen, Maomao's father and the chief physician at the time, was blamed for this great failure, as well as the difficulties during the birth. For these reasons he was banished, and he was further punished with mutilation. They removed the bones of one knee. The last thing he wanted was for his mistress to find out, for consort Arduo to know. He did not want her to discover that Fengeming was the reason the one child she would ever have was dead. So you tried to get consort Lishu out of the picture. During the reign of the prior emperor, Lishu had been quite close to Arduo. It was said Arduo had taken a great liking to her. Was it possible Arduo had been staying close to the young bride in hopes that the emperor would not consummate their relationship? A child separated from her parents, and a grown woman who could never give birth, a sort of symbiosis emerged between them. But one day, quite suddenly, consort Arduo stopped allowing Lishu to visit. The young consort came to see her many times, but each time Fengeming sent her away. Then the former emperor passed away and consort Lishu took vows. Consort Lishu told you, didn't she, that the honey could be poisonous? If Lishu had continued visiting often, she might have eventually let Arduo know the truth. Arduo was clever enough to put the pieces together. That was something Fengeming desperately wanted to avoid. After the emperor died and Lishu was safely in a nunnery, Fengeming thought she would never see the girl again. Then Lishu reappeared at the rear palace, still at high consort. Now there was a threat to Arduo. The girl almost seemed to make a show of visiting Arduo like a child eager for her mother. Lishu was so sheltered and so blind to the world around her. Therefore, Fengeming decided to get rid of her. Across from Maomao, there was no trace of the calm, caring chief lady-in-waiting. Fengeming's gaze was as cold as ice. What do you want? Nothing, Maomao said, although she felt a tingling on the back of her neck. The knife they had used to cut the buns earlier was on the shelf behind her. It was only a simple cleaver, but it was more than enough to threaten the petite Maomao. It was easily within Fengeming's reach. Anything at all, Fengeming ventured almost sweetly. You know perfectly well, milady, that such an offer is meaningless. Fengeming's lips curved vacantly at that. It didn't even rise to the level of a polite smile, but there was something deep within the expression. What was it? Say. Do you know what matters most to the person who matters most to you? Fengeming said to Maomao. A whisper of a smile was still on her face. Maomao shook her head. She did not know what was most important. It could be things or people. Well, I took it away, Fengeming said. Stole the child she cherished more than a jewel. From the moment Fengeming had entered Arduo's service, she knew she would serve no one else in her life. The consort had a firmness of will uncommon in a woman. She could bring to bear the same look as the air when she spoke. Fengeming respected her to no end. The consort struck Fengeming. Fengeming had spent her whole life doing just as her parents told her. It felt like a thunderbolt. She smiled as she told the story. Lady Arduo said something to me back then. She said her son had only followed the will of heaven. That was something we shouldn't be disturbed by. It was impossible to know if a child would survive to the age of 7. The slightest illness could kill them seemingly on the spot, and yet I could hear Lady Arduo crying every night. Fengeming looked slowly at the ground. A sort of moan escaped her. The immovable chief lady-in-waiting was gone. Now in her place there was only a woman racked with regret. How must she have felt as she served Consort Arduo for these 16 years? She devoted herself entirely to her lady, with no thought of a spouse or a partner. Maomao could not imagine. Fengeming did not understand her own emotions, or what it would feel like to cherish another person so deeply. Therefore she truly did not know what she wanted. Would Fengeming accept what Maomao was about to propose? Jinchi had certainly been informed of Maomao's recent interest in the archives. She did not think she could hide anything from the eunuch who all but ran the rear palace. She had managed to keep the truth to herself in the matter of Princess Fayu, but she did not think she could throw him off the trail this time. Nor did she want to. When he heard what Maomao had to say, Jinchi would have Fengeming arrested. She would certainly not escape the ultimate punishment. It did not matter what else happened or who appealed on her behalf. The truth would come to light after 16 years. Things had been set in motion. Even if Maomao were to vanish here and now, Fengeming would be found out sooner or later. The chief lady-in-waiting was too smart not to realize this. There was only one thing Maomao could do for her. Fengeming could not hope for a reduction in her punishment. She also could not hope for Consort Arduo to intervene on her behalf, but her two motives could be reduced to just one. She could continue to hide her motivation from Consort Arduo. Maomao knew she was saying something terrible. It was like asking another woman to die, but it was the only thing she could think of. It was the only thing a young woman with no particular influence or authority could offer. The outcome would be the same, but if Fengeming could accept that, she would do as Maomao urged her. So tired, Maomao returned to her chamber at the Jade Pavilion and collapsed onto her hard bed. Her clothes were soaked with sweat. This sweat had poured off of her at the moment of highest tension, and it reeked of fear. She wanted a bath. Thinking she could at least change, she pulled off her outer garments. This revealed a large cloth wrapped from her chest all the way down to her stomach. It held several layers of oil paper in place. Glad I didn't need it, she said to herself. Getting stabbed would still have hurt. Maomao stripped off the oil paper and found a fresh outfit. Jinchi could only contemplate this fact in amazement. Who would have imagined that the attempted poisoning of Consort Lishu would end with the culprit's suicide? Jinchi was in the sitting area of the Jade Pavilion, describing this outcome to a reticent lady-in-waiting. He had already informed Consort Jyokayu. And so Fengeming is dead by her own hand, he said. How lucky for all of us, the lady-in-waiting replied with no special show of emotion. Jinchi rested his elbows on the table. Gaeshun looked like he wanted to object, but Jinchi ignored him. Manners could be disregarded. Are you sure you don't know anything about this? He said. He sometimes felt this young lady was up to something. I can tell you what I don't know what you are talking about. I'm given to understand you kept Gaeshun quite busy gathering books. Yes. All for nothing, I'm afraid. She sounded so nonchalant he almost thought she was making fun of him. Then again, what else was new? It was possible she was carrying a bit of a grudge from his joke the other day. He had gone a bit overboard. For the most part, this seemed normal. She was giving him her standard glare, as if looking at filth. It went beyond rudeness to achieve a purity all its own. The motive, as you guessed, was to help Consort Arduo retain her seat among the four ladies. Is that so? Maomao looked at him with total disinterest. I'm sorry to have to tell you that Consort Arduo will indeed be demoted from her place as a high consort. She is to leave the rear palace and live at the south palace. Retribution for the attempted poisoning? Maomao asked. The cat had finally started to take an interest in the ball of string. No, the move was already settled. It was His Majesty's decision. The Emperor's long affection for Arduo must have been what allowed her to remain in an imperial residence, rather than being sent back to her home and family. Maomao's uncharacteristic show of interest promptly led Jinchi to get carried away. He stood and took a step forward. She tensed and took a half step back. So he was right. She hadn't quite gotten over his little japes. Naturally, Gaoshan watched them both with exasperation. It would do Jinshi no good if Maomao got too tense. He sat back down. The petite serving woman bowed her head and began to leave the room, but then she stopped. A branch of red trumpet-shaped flowers decorated the room. Jinshi informed her that Hongyang had put them there earlier. Indeed, Maomao said, "What a great burst of blooms." She took one of the blossoms, broke off the stem and put it in her mouth. Jinshi, perplexed, approached slowly and did the same. "It's sweet, yes, and poisonous." Jinshi spat out the stem and covered his mouth as Gaoshan rushed to get water. "Don't worry," Maomao said, "it won't kill you." Then the strange girl licked her lips, which carried the hint of a sweet smile of her own. Chapter 30 Ardu. It was pure coincidence that Maomao sneaked out of the Jade Pavilion on that particular night. She couldn't sleep. The next day the pure consort would depart the rear palace. Maomao wandered aimlessly around the grounds. The palace was already very cold from the winter, and she wore 2 cotton overgarments to keep warm. One thing hadn't changed in the rear palace. Promiscuity was still common, and one had to be careful not to look too closely in the bushes or into the shadows. For those who burned with passion, the winter chill presented no obstacle. Maomao glanced up and saw the half-moon hanging in the sky. A memory of Princess Fayu danced through her head. She decided that since she was out here anyway, she would climb up on the wall. She would have liked to share a drink with the moon, as the old poet said. However, there was no alcohol in the Jade Pavilion, so she regretfully gave up the idea. She should have saved some of the stuff Jinshi had given her. She suddenly wanted some snake wine. It had been a long time since she last had any. Then she remembered what happened the other day and shook her head, realizing it wasn't worth it. Maomao used the protruding bricks in the corner of the outer wall as footholds. She pulled herself up to the top. She had to watch her skirt so it would not tear. A proverb said that only 2 things liked high places: idiots and smoke. But Maomao had to confess that it felt good to be up above everything. The moon and a sprinkling of stars shone down upon the imperial city. The lights she could see in the distance must have been the pleasure district. She was sure that the flowers and the bees had begun their nightly communion there by now. Maomao had no particular business up on the wall. She simply sat on the edge, kicking her legs and looking up at the sky. Well, well, someone got here before me. The voice was neither high nor low. Maomao turned to discover a handsome young man in long pants. It looked like a young man, but it was actually Consort Ardu. She tied her hair back in a ponytail. It cascaded down her back, and a large gourd flask was suspended from her shoulder. A touch of red coloured her cheeks, and she was dressed relatively lightly. Her footing was sure, but it seemed she had had a bit to drink. "Do not mind me, milady." "I'll be leaving presently," Maomao said. "There's no rush. Share a cup with me." Presented with a drinking cup, Maomao could find no reason to refuse. She might normally have declined, thinking she was Consort Jaitkayu's serving woman. However, Maomao wasn't so vulgar as to refuse a last drink with Consort Ardu on her last night in the rear palace. Perfectly logical, you see. She certainly wasn't simply tempted by the opportunity for some wine. Maomao held the cup in both hands. It was full of a cloudy drink. The wine had a strongly sweet taste without much of the acid sting of alcohol. She did not say anything, just lapped at the cup of wine. Ardu showed no hesitation in drinking directly out of the gourd. "Thinking I seem a little mannish? Thinking that is how you seem to be acting? Ha, a straight shooter, I like that." Ardu raised one knee, bracing her chin on her hand. Her sharp nose and the long eyebrows that framed her eyes seemed familiar to Maomao. They reminded her of someone she knew. She thought her mind was a little cloudy, like the drink she had. "Since my son slipped away from me, I have been a friend of His Majesty." Or perhaps I should say she had returned to how things were. She stood beside him as a friend and did not need to act like a consort. She had known him since they were both children. She had never imagined she would be chosen as a consort. She was his first partner, yes. She had assumed she was simply his guide. One might almost say she was a mentor to him. Then, because His Majesty favoured her, she remained his consort for more than 10 years. However, she had been only ornamental during that time. She wished he would hurry up and hand her off to someone. Why had he clung to her so? Ardu continued ruminating to herself. She would likely have gone on whether or not Maomao was there. She would have gone on whether or not anyone was there. This consort would be gone tomorrow. Any rumors that might spread in the rear palace would no longer concern her. Maomao only listened in silence. When she had finally finished speaking, the consort got to her feet. Then she turned the gourd upside down, emptying its contents over the wall and into the moat beyond. She seemed to be offering the libation as a parting gift. Maomao thought of the serving woman who had killed herself some days before. It must have been so cold in the water. Yes, ma'am, she must have suffered. Yes, ma'am, how stupid. After a moment Maomao said, "You may be right, everyone is so stupid, you may be right." She understood, though only dimly. The serving woman had been a suicide. Ju knew this. Perhaps she had known the woman who killed herself. Maybe everyone included Fengeming. Fengeming might have had a hand in the woman's death. The serving woman was sunk in the freezing water so that suspicion might not fall on consort Ju. Fengeming had hung herself to keep a secret that must never be known. All those people had given their lives for Ju, literally or figuratively, whether she wished it or not. What a tremendous waste. Ju had the personality and the mettle to rule people. If she could have been by the emperor's side, not as his consort but in another form, perhaps politics would have gone more smoothly. Perhaps. Maomao let the thoughts drift through her mind, though there was no point to them now as she gazed up at the stars. Ju climbed back down the wall first, and Maomao, starting to feel properly chilly, was just doing the same when she was stopped by a voice. "What are you doing?" Startled, Maomao lost her footing and slipped from halfway down the wall, landing hard on her back and behind. Who the hell was that? She grumbled to herself. "Well, pardon me," the voice hissed, now right in her ear. She turned in surprise to see Jinshi. He looked less than pleased. "Master Jinshi, what are you doing here? You took the words right out of my mouth." Maomao realized she hadn't felt any pain when she landed. There had been an impact, it is true, but no sense of having hit the ground. This mystery wasn't hard to solve. She had fallen right on top of Jinshi. Whoops, Maomao tried to get up, but she couldn't move. She was held fast. "Master Jinshi, perhaps you could let go of me," she said, trying to sound polite. But Jinshi's arms remained resolutely wrapped around her midriff. "Master Jinshi," he stubbornly ignored her. Maomao squirmed and turned to look at his face. She noticed a flush in his cheeks and could smell alcohol on his breath. "Have you been drinking? I was socializing." "I didn't have a choice," Jinshi said, looking up at the sky. The winter air was crisp and clear, making the starlight seem even brighter. He was socializing. Right, Maomao looked suspiciously at him. Socializing in the rear palace could mean some very shady things. It could be argued that the emperor still gave the place's inhabitants a bit too much freedom, even if many of them were missing some very important parts. "I said, let go of me. Don't wanna." "I'm cold." Despite his beauty, the eunuch sounded quite petulant. Of course he was cold. He wasn't wearing even a light jacket. Maomao wondered where Geishan was. "I'm sure you are," she said. "You had better get back to your room before you catch a cold." She didn't care if the room he went to was his own quarters or the chambers of whoever had shared the wine with him. Jinshi, however, pressed his forehead against Maomao's neck, almost nuzzling her. "Damn it, you asked me to come in and drink and you got me all soused up. Then you said, I think I'll step out for a while. Sure, off you go to who knows where, damn it. Then you come back and now you're feeling much better. And you chase me out too, damn it all." Maomao discovered she was impressed to realize there was anyone in the rear palace with the nerve to treat Jinshi that way. But that detail wasn't important right now. "I really don't want to hang out with someone who is drunk. They always become clingy, and that is the problem. Actually, wait a moment. It just occurred to me that Maomao is in this situation because she fell onto Jinshi from above. He had been kind enough to break her fall, even if he hadn't realized he was doing so. Perhaps it was the alcohol that had left him lying among the weeds at that moment. Maomao reflected that it was a little rude to immediately start giving orders without a word of thanks to someone who had just saved you from a nasty fall. But she could not lie there either. She began to say, "Master Jinch." Her attempt to free herself was interrupted by something dropping onto her neck. It was warm, and the feeling ran down her back. "Just a moment longer," Jinshi said, hugging her tighter. "Help me warm myself just a little bit." Maomao sighed. His voice did not sound like it ordinarily did. Then she looked up at the sky and started counting the gleaming stars one by one. A great crowd gathered at the main gate the next day. The longest-serving consort in the rear palace was, in contrast to the night before, dressed in a wide-sleeved jacket and skirt. It hardly suited her. Some of the women around her clutched handkerchiefs. The handsome, boyish consort had been something of an idol to many of the young ladies. Jinchi stood in front of our duo. One might have worried about them after all the drinking the night before. However, neither showed any sign of a hangover. She gave him something, a headdress. It was the symbol of the pure consort. Before long the headdress would pass to another woman. They could stand to trade outfits. The celestial beauty and the handsome woman, they could hardly have been more different in principle, and yet they oddly seemed to share much. That is it, Maomao thought. The night before she had thought our duo resembled somebody, but she hadn't been able to think of who.